Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the JC Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum. And today we are in the White Garden because it's a classy location in the garden. We have a classy program for you today. We have our director, Mark Weathington, here, who's going to go over If I Knew Then What I Know Now, all of the bits and pieces of wisdom he's gleaned over the years that if he had known it when he had first started, well, he surely would have done it. He wants to share that wisdom with you to give you some insights on all the things that a professional gardener learns over their career, so you can take some of these lessons and implement them in your own garden. So it should be just a wonderful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I can pass things over to Mark so he can tell us all the things he's learned over the years in his illustrious horticulture career.
Well, thank you, Blake. That was a great introduction. I don't know if I've learned everything that I should. You know, I was thinking about some of these things. I'll tell you what I haven't learned. I have not learned to take good pictures of before and after, or garden pictures. I'm convinced I could present myself as a really good designer if I could compose a picture better, and I could take pictures that would look like I'm a good designer rather than the pictures of plants. I gotta tell you, these midweek things, I don't usually have my computer in front of me because we haven't been doing PowerPoints with these much, and I wasn't planning to do a PowerPoint, but I decided that you would rather look at plants than at me. But it was a mistake, because when I opened up my computer, there was one of the people I learned a ton from when I started gardening as a young gardener, my boss at Atlanta Botanical Garden. I don't think there are too many people with the same name, so I'm pretty sure that's her on there. So, Mildred, anything I say that you like, that's not on me. You can put that on the chat and say don't blame Atlanta Botanical Garden for that. And I could tell you about some mistakes I made when I worked at Atlanta Botanical Garden. But this was an interesting thought experiment for me. Sometimes when somebody brings up a topic, you immediately think of 2 or 3 things. And you're like, oh, this will be easy. And then you start thinking more and more, and you realize, wow, there's a lot to say about all the mistakes that I've made and the things I've learned over time in gardening. And I really decided mostly to try to restrict myself to my home garden, the mistakes that I've made and learned from, or not even the mistakes I've made, just what I've learned over the years. I wish I could go back to Atlanta and get a picture of my first house there. I went by there, maybe 8-10 years ago, and I'm like, oh gosh, I feel so sorry for the person who bought that house after me, because I planted all kinds of things that I shouldn't have, and I will get into that. One of the things, and this is you were talking about JC at the beginning. I blame this on JC because I've been here too long, is I still plant things way too close together. Way too close together. Too many great plants to space them like I should. I'll go ahead and get started so y'all don't have to look at me. So this is my home garden. I live at the end of a road, nice cul-de-sac. It's great to live at a cul-de-sac because then if you got the right place, you not only have your property, but you have the property that kind of is no man's land behind there. And I've got a whole lot of that around my house. And this was my first house to have sun. I've always gardened in shade exclusively. I was so excited to have sun. I got my sun garden, what you can see out here a little bit, going, and then I immediately went into the woodlands and started gardening in there because I was like, man, it is hot around here during the summer. A lot of it will come back to the same things for me in terms of what I've learned the most. But something, if you join us regularly on these programs, the thing that we'll say over and over again is the soil. Right? It all starts with the soil. I wish that every garden I had started with the soil, but I never did until this house. And when I moved in, we ripped out everything and brought in lots of great soil, topsoil and compost mix, and made some topography, and I'll talk about that a little bit. You can see, this is all of that's mulched there is under that is feet of really good soil. And that makes it so nice to garden. Weeds come out a lot easier. Plants go in a lot easier. Plants come back out a lot easier when you move them because you've planted them too close. And it makes life a lot better. I have some areas of the garden because I keep expanding, and I don't always get my soil as well as I should. I have some areas where I literally will have to either wait till it rains or put sprinklers out so I can go weed the area, because if it gets dry, I can't even pull the weeds out. So,
Sandy was looking at that picture of your yard, and she wants to know if you have an HOA that requires any percentage of turf in the front yard.
No HOA. When we moved here, we looked around at some places, and one of the close suburbs of Raleigh, we looked at several houses there that all had HOAs, and I knew even back then, I never made that mistake. I knew back then that there was no way I was going to be able to live somewhere where they were telling me what I could and could not put in the ground. But so really doing the soil, but it's also with the soil, as I've gone into the woodlands where I haven't, added piles and piles of soil in there, there are different spots in my woodland where I have different types of soil. And so there are areas where I've got a lot of humusy duff going on. And in those spots, I'll plant some things that would prefer that. There are other spots where it's more heavy clay. There's some spots that actually have some really fantastic soil. And, I've even gone so far as where I've been putting in a path and planning out where the path was going. I found the soil was so good there. I was like, let me move the path over. I'd rather have to go around this nice spot than walk over it. But also, gardening for the long term, you learn that green is a color. There are ways of dealing with it, but one of the things that I've learned, and I try to tell people when we talk to new gardeners in this area, especially people who've come from up north where it's colder and the seasons are shorter, is, they talk about, there isn't as much color in your gardens. And it's like, well, your garden up there in Minnesota is white for 8 months. Ours is green at least. But, when you go to these Minnesota and, some of the New England gardens, everything is flowering at once and it's amazing. And you see pictures like that and you think, gosh, why can't we get that? And it's because our season is so long that even the same plants that we grow, if we were to have the exact same gardens that they have, say hydrangeas and iris and lilies and things that we can all grow, theirs are going to be flowering at the same time. Whereas ours will be, one will have long been finished, the next one will be getting ready to start, and so they don't all combine together. So you really have to decide when you garden, if you're gardening for flowers, you have to decide, do I want a heavy concentration of flowers all at once, or do I want to spread it out over a longer period? Now, if you're a really good designer, like better than me, you can layer those flower colors and have things, early bulbs and things like that. But you're going to have a lot of foliage and green there during the seasons, and it won't be this full coverage of color all the time. If you don't consider green a color. I consider green a color. There's so much great texture. There's so much great texture that those folks up in Minnesota can't do. And we also don't have to shovel snow. So, we win as far as I'm concerned. The texture, what you're growing, how you're growing, we get these great shapes and forms, and sometimes these things survive. That little guy up in the kind of the front there with the weird, almost rounded leaves, that's a little Brassaiopsis. That's a weird kind of a subtropical plant that I'm becoming obsessed with. I overwintered one last winter, so it's now taller than me, but it probably is not going to survive. And I'm going to apologize right now to Blake, who tries very hard to get these names in. I wanted to, but it didn't manage.
Apology accepted, Mark. we'll get through this.
We'll get through it. All right. I say green's a color, but also there are so many plants with beautiful foliage. And it's funny, the English all turn their nose up at variegation. I'm like, why? What's wrong with variegated plants? Sure, some of them can be tacky. The really good ones are tacky, but, they can be a little more subtle. And, something like this with this Ajuga incisa Bikun in there, it's you get this bright burst of color. That's as good to me as any flower. And combine it with ferns and other green plants. Great stuff. But I do like my flowers as well. A lesson that I never do learn is when I go through every so many years, in the front right there is Crocosmia. And if somebody can tell me how to keep Crocosmia from getting mites and spreading wildly, and I think the solution is to live somewhere like England, where it just stays a little bit tidier and doesn't have so many mite problems. But I will plant it because it's so gorgeous. I will grow it for a few years and then I will rip it out. This is actually a phase that has been ripped out in my garden and been planted again. So I have not learned my lesson. That's that orange one. I planted it with a nice, really bright red one, and it's kind of still doing the same thing. I am a plant collector, plant lover. The gardening in drifts of one kind of a thing. I love that. So I have finally learned that especially where I have flowers, if I can designate my beds in certain ways. So this is a picture of my hotbed. I have yellows and oranges and reds in there, both foliage and flowers. And that way I don't have to think so much. I have a cool bed with pinks and blues and lavenders and purples. And I have a blue and gold bed, small bed. Those are just in my sun beds. In the garden, in the shade garden, anything goes.
I like that idea. Like that gives, say you have a rough day at work and you need to chill out for a little bit, go to your cool bed,
Yeah.
Maybe you need to up the energy a little bit. You got your hot bed. That's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and it's it makes it look it lessens the really jarring contrast between plants sometimes. So it helps a little bit there with my I'll put design in big air quotes. Some really neat things. Although one of those beds in the back is a kind of an anything goes bed, but that's where all the stuff that doesn't fit anywhere else is destined for. But still, textures and colors are part of that. I grow exactly 2 daylilies. One is Hokie Spirit, because I'm a Hokie, Virginia Tech. So I have a Hokie Spirit. That's that one with the orange and maroon up front in the corner. I also grow one that I collected in the wild that I just kind of like. I grow about 3 seedlings from it that I think is neat. Otherwise, a former boss, not the one who has joined us here, just killed me on daylilies, because we would drive around the garden where we worked and he would say, seems like we need something here, maybe some daylilies. And I never planted a daylily. It was, my pettiness or something. But we get these beautiful textures and colors on there. Like I said, flowers are great. I like flowers when there aren't so many other flowers. There's a lot of stuff going on in the spring. It's easy to have flowers in the spring, but there are many fewer plants, especially ones that will go in shade, that are flowering late season, and the colors late season tend to be, out in the sun, are a lot of the oranges and yellows and really, really hot colors. And so a group that I've really fallen in love with are the gesneriads, the
African violets.
African violet relatives. Thank you so much. I mean, you can see this is late season. You can see it because if you look at the hosta at the top, you can see where it has been eaten by deer and has started to come back out again after being completely eaten by deer. But here we actually there's 3 different ones in here. There is the white flowered plant is a Hemiboea subcapitata, and then we have two, depending on your taxonomist, Semannia or Syningias. The one with the dark leaves and the red flowers is Semannia Little Red. And then the one with kind of the lighter colored leaves that's not quite in flower yet, right up at the very front and center, is Semannia Lolita. Lolita. And these are all phenomenal plants for us, but they bloom. They're just, the Hemiboea is just starting to think about flowering right now. The buds are all set, but not a single flower's out yet. Probably got another couple weeks, and my Semannia haven't even thought about it. So I'm always looking for those plants that are going to provide some interest when other things are maybe slowing down. And I've had gardens where it was all spring, and then it kind of nothing after that. So another thing I've learned is to grow what makes you happy and just don't care about what other people think. That shouldn't be something that I would have to learn, but I do. And I put it here because one of the better, in my mind, purple coneflowers, I think this one is maybe tomato soup, or I can't remember. It's one of the double red orange ones. That's not a purple coneflower, it's a red coneflower. And I planted it and it flowered and it was great. And I looked at it and I thought, I just don't like them. I don't like them. Why am I growing this? Ripped it out. Grow what makes you happy. That's easy. Get rid of the other stuff. If you're out there gardening, why grow something you don't like? It's amazing to me how many people will grow plants that they do not like, that they find, they're too much trouble. They got to prune them all the time, or they drop all kinds of things, or they always get some kind of pest or insect, or they're defoliated by midsummer, or don't flower well for them, or whatever the reason is, they keep growing it. Man, I love getting in there and ripping that plant out. I am ruthless. In fact, I go around and I have to restrain myself right now. I know my wife is going to get a little irritated with me if I take out 3 of the shrubs that I want to take out in my front small bed just because it'll look empty again. And she's always like, what? We've been here for 7 years. Why do these beds keep looking empty? It's because I rip them out. And I either just rip them out and put them out on the curb for somebody to take, or I got a woodland, so I will often take a plant out and move it into, if it's a sunny spot in the woodland, especially the woody plants. If I really don't care much about it, I plant a mixed hedge at the very bottom of my property by a city right-of-way where they mow it twice a year. And so it's a deer highway. And so I'll just plant there. And if the deer eat some of that, that's okay, as long as they keep going. I just plant plants on top of each other just about down there. So it's basically forming a hedgerow over time. Pancyrus is really good for that, the trifoliate orange, big thorns on there. People say, but why would you do that? Why would you kill a plant? It's growing so healthily. I'm like, yeah, but if I don't want it in my garden, then why would I keep growing it? That also applies to, what you put in your garden that's not a plant, put what you love in there. I didn't put the slide in here, but I used to have a slide that I would put in talks pretty regularly. It was provide a laugh line. It was all kinds of ugly stuff in somebody's garden. Ugly being what the normal person would say. And, at some point I realized how much I loved that garden, even though I'd never been there, never met the person. It was like, that person's doing their thing and forget about it. If you don't like it, keep on walking, because every other person's landscape is the same as you go along. So, now I find, when I travel or when I go places, I find things that make me happy and put them in the garden, give me memories. There's a little kind of over on the right side, you might be able to see a little bird on a stake. I actually have 3 of those. Those are from South Africa. Those are little stone carvings that sit up and kind of move a little bit around in the breeze. And then I've got my blue pig. When I was a wee lad, my desire was to be a pig farmer. So I enjoy pigs, and I love the blue cobalt, in the garden. So, I put that there, and I planted that gold leaf gardenia, Gardenia Oganohana, right there to show off my blue pig. And that extends to the types of plants. I go through I go through all kinds of, obsessions where I want to collect all kinds of things, and then I'll get tired of them at some point. Right now, I kind of had to go through my pictures to figure out what I was on a big kick on. Species peonies. I'm big on species peonies. So you got the pink peony caucasica from the Caucasus regions. You got the yellowy white peony Moscovicii, Molly the Witch, as it's known. And one that was just in our plant sale, the red peony peregrina. And, they flower and it gets hot and those petals all drop within, 3 hours. Sometimes it seems, but I don't care. I love them. And after they flower, the species peonies have such nice foliage until it looks bad. And then when it starts looking bad, I just cut it all down. I just, as soon as something starts bothering me, it's cut to the ground. But if they don't look bad, if the foliage stays looking good, you get these beautiful seed heads on there that pop open, and you have brilliant red seeds that didn't ripen, and these red fruits and the red seeds as well. I mean, blue-black fruits. It's gorgeous. That's just another season of color, and that's every bit as effective or more effective than the flowers that are on there. Now, I've also kind of obsessed with the ginger lilies, hedychiums, and again, I really like the species ones. I don't know. At some point, I've been over from all the cultivars, although I have quite a few. But here we have hedychium. Hedychium deceptum, and I think it was hedychium stenopetalum is the narrow leaf one. If it wasn't stenopetalum, you'll have to ask me later for it. And I was talking about the African violet relatives. This is where it's gotten really exciting for me. The hemiboeas, I've been growing for a while. The Semanias for a long time, some of the Syningias. But here, this is a recent one from Vietnam that has been hardy for us for a couple of years now. We haven't had a really cold winter. Raphiocarpus, I believe, if there are any Gesneriad experts on here, you can tell me I'm wrong about that. But it's got these fuzzy leaves with purple backs, and then these long kind of pale yellow flowers with red stripes and the pink stripes in the throats. And then this other one's another hemiboea on the side here. This is probably the most vigorous plant I have in my garden. It's one that we collected with Scott McMahon from Atlanta Botanical Garden that we co-named and introduced Jiangxi bells, Hemiboea subcapitata variety Jiangxiensis Jiangxi bells. We've distributed several times. The leaves on my plant right now are 18 inches long, about 10 or 12 inches wide, dark green, fuzzy. It hasn't started flowering just yet, but when I was out in the garden the other day, I was noticing all the buds are starting, and they're these great big, almost like clamshell buds. I don't know if that's really the technical term, because they open, inside the buds is a whole cluster of flowers, not individual flowers, but these whole cluster. And these are the largest flowers on any hemiboea ever seen, ever grown, and it is a ground cover. It runs. Now I've got it in really rich, beautiful soil, but it goes. But it's easy to pull out. I just the other day brought in a garbage bag full of plants that took about 10 minutes of weeding, garbage bag filled, brought it into Sophia here at the nursery, and she looked at it and said, I have about 100 in the nursery. I'm just going to compost all that. Okay, but so buyer beware. It will spread, but it's easy to keep in control, and it spreads by rhizomes. It doesn't seed around or anything like that. But there are other ones. It's a little yellow Lysionotus called pudding. Not very hardy, but this did come back for me this past winter. It didn't the winter before. But these Gesneriads, African violets, they're super easy to propagate. You cuttings, stick them in some moist soil, they root, and like this pudding is actually a great house plant as well. And then we've grown several Esquinanthus buxifolius, and we found one clone that's really doing well. It's got small leaves. It seems to be hardier than the other clones we've grown. It's just coming into flower right now. Brilliant red flowers that sit up on top of it. And it's like a little miniature shrub kind of a thing. I think if we have a zone 7B winter, many of these beyond the hemiboeas and the semanias are probably going to be gone. But, who knows? A couple of years surviving in the ground, they may have enough root there and mass to survive a winter. And I'll say, here's another lesson along those lines. What I'm finding in my garden as I've built topography in both the sunny parts and I've gone into my woodland, which is very much sloped, I've really found that slopes make a huge difference for plants. It's just, it really is unbelievable. I can have plants 5 feet apart from each other, one growing on a flat plane, one growing on a slope, and the one on the slope will survive the winter so much better. And we always think of things in terms strictly of cold. How cold was it? But there's cold and there's wet and there's air movement and there's all these other pieces to it. And so I think when you get plants on a slope, when they're cold, they're not sitting with moisture around their roots. It's moving through there. The cold air is rolling down. I mean, that's something that orchardists have known forever. You don't plant your peaches, which are tender, at the bottom of the hill. You plant them up higher because the cold air rolls down and settles at the bottom. Well, if you're flat, that's where it's settled. Even if it's not rolling from anywhere, it's sitting there. And then the other thing, we always talk about microclimates, and people think of that as like little corners in places. But my woodland, I've done a lot of clearing in there, and I just leave tall pines is mostly what I leave in those areas, and some larger broadleaf things, but mostly pines. And that's because you get this high shade. So their branches are very high. There's a lot of light that gets through. But in the winters, some of that cold air or warmer air that's warmed up during the day is held beneath those branches, and you get a significant difference in temperature. And I often ask people when we're doing our garden conversations what their favorite gardening tool is. I'll tell you what my most useful gardening tool is I have a very cheapo, $49.99 probably, little, not weather station, but it's a little Bluetooth thing where I've, the one I have now is 5. It started with 3 little temperature gauges that I can put outdoors, and it'll send the temperatures into my, right by my bed there on a little readout screen. And so first thing in the morning, I can see, what the temperature is in different places in my garden. And so as I garden in someplace new, or I change it in any way, I'll put those there, and so I can compare it to more open areas, other microclimates that I've dealt with before, so that I know what those temperatures are. But so I can compare, and 3 to 5 difference is huge when you're talking about plants. And so I can really see where those differences are, and it's amazing. And I do them at different heights, kind of just playing around and trying to see where it's staying warmer for me. You can go all out and get soil probes, that'll do temperature in the soil and things like that. I haven't done that, although it'd be interesting to look at that on the slopes versus flat places. And a lot of these plants that I'm having success with are because I'm growing them on a slope. So I have started even just making small slopes, putting a stone or an old log and building up soil on there and planting on that and getting things established that way. A lot of ferns like that as well.
It's really fun watching the plants we planted out on the berms recently. Like there's a Cercis juniana that we have planted out here, and it's had just a season in the ground. It was planted back in June, the hottest, driest time of the year, and that thing is more vigorous than the one that's been in the garden up at the entrance for the past however many years. So it's real fascinating, the things you learn by trying things in different places and then watching them.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then going from kind of a larger microclimate to really microclimate. So especially with these gesneriads and the hardy orchids that I'm going to talk about, Blake, I have found that no matter where I grow them, and I started doing this because some of these little gesneriads, like this little Primulina ligastrina on the left here, and then the Brigsia, I think Brigsia myri on the right, two little clumping gesneriads. They get lost easily because these things, you get them and they're teeny tiny little things. And some of them, like the one on the right, the Brigsia, will stay as a teeny tiny little thing for a long time, at least for me. And so I started just kind of not putting a rock where they were, but where there was a rock, I would plant them by that, just so that I wouldn't step on it. The dogs wouldn't step on it. And I found that when I did that, those plants grew so much better. And so now sometimes when I have some of these little tiny gesneriads, little tiny orchids, things like that, that naturally are growing kind of on these seepage cliff faces and things like that, which is where these little guys grow, I will actually take a rock, set it in the soil, a one person, what the stone people call a huggable, a stone you can hug and move by yourself with two arms. I'll get that set in and I'll just plant plants kind of around that. It's almost like putting things in a container, except for it's the other way around. And I find they establish so much quicker. And if you lift the rock up and flip it over, it's damper under there, it's cooler under there. So these plants can get their roots kind of up under there and really get established. But they grow at, oh my gosh, easily 2, 3, 4 times the rate of that. So I'm not even building a rock garden. I'm just putting rocks in my garden. Mildred, I'm sorry. I know Mark does good job work with stonework. And he tried to teach me, but my stonework is not to be envied. I haven't learned enough on that to get past my. But I just love that. Lilies, I love lilies too. Species lilies especially, they're a little bit daintier, they're a little bit nicer. And I realized as I put this together, and this is actually a lesson that I was actually told by my former boss who's joined us, is that you can love trees and shrubs all you want, but when you've got a garden at home, you can only put so many trees and shrubs in, and you start to really like all the herbaceous stuff as well, because you can get more of that. And she was right. Unfortunately, the rabbits like the species lilies as much as I do, and they will come in and wait until there's a nice fat bud on there, and then they will just nip the top right off that whole stem and knock it over. So I'm working on that. Working on those rabbits, and the giant, the liliums, lily relatives like Cardiocrinum, this Cardiocrinum cordatum variety Glenii. So if you ever see the giant Himalayan lilies, Cardiocrinum giganteum, Cardiocrinum cordatum, the best ones that I've found for us, the ones that will flower in a reasonable amount of time, will live until they flower, will often come back after they flower, is Cardiocrinum cordatum variety Glenii, Glehni, which is the Japanese species, the variety. This is one that's a really nice pink. Generally, they're white. This was a seedling from a pink one. And then orchids. You said orchids. We don't grow so many of them outside. I love orchids. I'm growing them. And the orchids are expensive. And I sometimes mention on here that a lot of things I'll grow at home that I don't grow here at the Arboretum because I don't want to spend Arboretum money on it. So I'll grow them at home. And if they really do well, I'll grow them, and then I'll bring in divisions and things into the Arboretum. So orchids are one. I love the Cypripediums. I went through an orchid phase growing them indoors, and as soon as I moved into a house, I was done with houseplants. I don't like to water, so we've got the middle's a Cypripedium cultivar. I believe this one is Inga, I-N-G-E. And Cypripedium formosanum on the right, the Taiwanese slipper orchid with that real distinctive ruffled foliage. And then the one on the left is a little tiny one. It's not a great picture because it's such a little tiny thing. Cypripedium plecticilum. I would not recommend spending money on that. It is a very small plant and they are very expensive, but it's been a real easy one to grow for us to grow. If you want super easy, on the right here, calanthes. The calanthe orchids are just super easy. This is a seedling from what's called the Kozu Spice hybrids. This one's an orangey yellow one, beautiful, multiplies quickly. This is hard to kill, and deer pretty much don't eat orchids at all. So 2 thumbs up. They're just expensive. Now, one's talking about those microclimates, the ones that I've been growing, Pleones. These are little rock orchids. They look like kind of the big corsage orchids, except for they're small, much smaller flowered. But I finally saw them growing in the wild, and they grow on just these sheer rock faces. And, I thought, maybe this is what I'm doing wrong, is I'm planting it too well. So now I've started doing these on these slopes underneath rocks, and they do so much better this way. This one is, I forget the species name on it, but terrible picture, but I caught it just when I'd come back from China in late October one year, and was so excited to see it in flower. I was rushing to get home to see my wife and it. But it's fun in the garden to follow these obsessions, but you don't have to stick with them forever. You can, once you get tired of something, you can give them to friends or just kind of forget about them out in the garden and move on to new and fun things. And it's funny, as gardeners, we go through that a lot. There was the Asarum frenzy of 1992 and the epimediums of 1996 and the great Carex stampede of 1998. I don't know. And things go in and out of fashion. Perennial geraniums, you can barely find any in the market now. You'll find a handful of them, but it looks like they're coming back in a little bit. Epimediums need to come back in too, but they kind of had their time in the sun and moved on. All right, and those who've heard me talk know how much I love vines, but specifically I love the little flowered clematis. If you were going to grow one small vine, Clematis raguchi, that is the one on the left. That is such a good plant. That is one of the best garden plants I grow. I would not garden without it. Just millions and millions of these little purple bells with upturned little tips. The one next to it is Clematis tengutica, my angel, one of the several little yellow species that I grow. This is one that has a little more rose blush on it. The beautiful seed heads after they finish. I'll show some pictures of those as well. And the great thing about these is if all the clematis, pruning group 1, pruning group 2, pruning group 3, if that gets to you, you're like, what does that mean? Here's the key. Get pruning group 3. Pruning group 3 means cut them to the ground in the winter. Cut them all the way back, and they'll resprout from the ground. And that's why I grow these specifically on other plants. Always just plant it at the base of another plant. And that way they grow up through there, they clamber through there, they give me another season of bloom, another season of color, and then I cut them back to the ground, pull out all the old dead stuff, and let them do it again the next year. So they never swamp the plants that they're on, and I never have to remember if, exactly anything else with it. It's just cut it all the way down. And Speaking of cutting things down, there's a lot of great plants that often don't get widely grown because they have great foliage, but they flush a great foliage at one point. So this is an osmanthus. This is something Weathington. I'm having a senior moment, drawing blank, but it comes out brilliant pink and then goes white and then green. And so it's beautiful. And then it's green for the rest of the season. I was like, well, I planted it too close to other things. What's going to happen if I cut it back? Utanon Weathington. What's going to happen if I cut it back? Well, I started cutting it back. After it goes completely green, I'll give it a real hard cut shearing on it, and it'll flush back out with that hot pink. Goes white and then green pretty quick, but it does that. And so I started doing that with the Illicium Murasaki no Sato, the purple leafed Illicium, which comes out just glossy black purple and then goes green for the rest of the season. So now, as soon as it starts, the green starts fading in the spring, I will cut it back again and let it flush out again. Now, I'm not cutting it back to the ground. I'm just trimming it back, and I want to keep it kind of small. I've kind of decided to go from what was going to be a big shrub, and then I was going to keep it down to a low mound. Now I'm like, I think I'm going to do like a kind of a pillar of this. So I've started letting it go a little more upright but cutting it in close. And so one summer I cut it twice. So I got 3 flushes of purple. Didn't seem to bother it a bit. This past year I only did it once, but this second picture, this is another vine that I love. This is a South American vine, Bomaria edulis, that is flowering later in the season, but it's, when I planted it, I was like, won't this be beautiful with the purple foliage? Well, it doesn't flower when the foliage is purple normally, but now that I started cutting it back, now I'm getting that beautiful pink flower with that foliage as well. And, if cutting it back had damaged the plant and it hadn't been happy, well, I wouldn't have done it again, but it's not doing it any problems. And so it's almost like deadheading to get flowers again, except for it's to get this color. So right now in my garden, my plant is dark purple because I cut it back about 2 weeks ago, and it is all popping out again right away. I did not cut it back hard during 6 weeks of drought. So I cut it back a little bit later than I normally would. And vines, just all these vines, the Bomarias, even the Achebias. This is Achebia longa racemosa, the long racema flowers. Achebias get wild. They get too big. I'm not growing it on my other plants. I'm growing it where I can manage it and control it. And I trim it back a little bit about every week, just the things that are, reaching out to grab you. And if it gets too rambunctious, I'll cut it back really hard, but I don't let it go to seed. I, don't let it spread around on the ground via runners. It can go one direction and that's up. And it's hard to see in there, but I've actually got another vine growing with it. I've got a vine that we just had for sale in our plant sale, the South African Bignonia castelligioides, which flowers later and is lavender. So I get this early burgundy and then the later lavender flowers, theoretically. And if they're too rambunctious, we have plants that are vining-like, that are kind of halfway between a perennial and a vine, like the Gloriosa lilies, Gloriosa superba. And there's a whole bunch of species. They all look exactly the same to me, but they grow up like a lily or something. They'll just flop on the ground unless they have something that they can kind of grab onto with the leaf tips that'll curl around and grab. So it grows up. This is growing through a dwarf dawn redwood. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous when it flowers. And, once you really get into these vines, you'll start doing a bunch of them. Here, you can see kind of the bluish leaves near the top. That's one of my favorite shrubs. That's pineapple guava. Phaeoa celoiana or Acaceloiana. And then you can see kind of the rounder leaves down across the bottom and the top. That's a vining bean in the bean family. It's Bauhinia unanensis. Most Bauhinia are trees or shrubs. This is a vining one with small pink flowers that look kind of like orchids. And then you can see also through there are little powder, like little puffy seed heads. That's another yellow flowered, small flowered clematis that flowered earlier in the season, looked beautiful against that pale blue. Now it's got these feathery seed heads all through it, and it's one called Clematis serratifolia. And I won't say that there might not be another vine planted at the base of this plant now. The plant's gotten bigger. It can take another vine, right? I just, on a beautiful Calicarpa Pearl Glam, I had a great clematis on there that echoed those colors, but I just put another pink Bomaria on it, and a fuchsia, one of the fuchsias that'll survive for us, that kind of likes to vine. So fuchsia Hashbachii, which to grow through it. Just planted those out a week or two ago on the beautyberry. So I mentioned microclimates. One of the things, the things that I don't tell my wife get me excited about the house. We've got a great house. It's kind of outside. It's early 90s neighborhood house, but it had some kind of weird edges, and kind of on the back side of my garage and next to our laundry room and our kitchen is this little bed area that's tucked into a corner. And that's where I plant all my things that I'm really unsure how they're going to do, because it's very protected in there, and have had fantastic luck. And now I'm having to transplant some pretty large things out of there into other areas of the garden. But, I play with those microclimates. And as I've told people, I am not averse to starting the dryer late at night before going to bed and drying clothes there, since there's a vent right there above that. And, I garden for myself. I don't garden. I don't care if people like the garden. I don't care if people see the garden. People do come down to our cul-de-sac and say nice things to me. It might be because who I do garden with is my dogs. And so whether it's dogs or people, and, I kind of laugh about this. This was because I just want to put in pictures of my dogs. This is Gus. Gus is the first gardening dog I've ever had. He's my wife's dog, but he's my garden dog. He goes out and he hangs out with me all day. He will bark at people if they come walking down our street. As I always say, nobody has come and killed us yet, so he is doing his job. He has protected us. He sometimes falls in creeks, but my dogs run through the beds sometimes. They pee on plants sometimes. I've learned, I thought I couldn't figure out why I kept having plants in a couple of spots die, and I realized because they're out by the road, kind of near the mailbox, and if somebody's walking their dog and my dog has not scared them away, their dog's peeing on that. And then my dog's peeing on that, and then my other dog's peeing on that, and then another dog's peeing on that. If you want to avoid that, my neighbor across the street, every dog, including mine, pees on their spirea. It has not killed it yet. The old just Spirea thunbergii, the old bridal wreath, it hadn't killed it. It looks fine. So do that. But now I just don't plant things in that spot that I'm worried about them killing by peeing on it, or I plant big enough things that they're not going to kill it, because I'm sharing the garden with my dogs. There's Harvey. Harvey gets a little colder, so during the winter he's got to wear a coat out in the garden, but he's still got to be on a leash with me outside because he's an explorer. But he likes it, and that bonus, they get real tired in the evenings. I do have my daughter's dog does stay with us most days while my daughter works, because she has a very rambunctious dog. And I have even learned to live with Ronnie in my garden. Ronnie is not as kind to the plants. If any of you get some Daphne ginkwa, the beautiful lilac Daphne, anytime soon from the Arboretum, from our plant sales or anything like that, that is probably because Ronnie has uprooted the Daphne, and so I decided to just bring it in, cut the top off, and stick a whole bunch of cuttings, and not be upset about the dog doing that. And the lesson I learned is, if you're not out there spraying and dumping things on your garden, you get a whole lot more friends out in the garden as well. Frogs and lizards and snakes, which are great in gardens. They eat the critters that eat your plants, birds and pollinators, and I'm not afraid to have my dogs out there, so I don't spray. And this goes back to get rid of things you don't like. If I don't like spraying. So if I got to spray something, it's out of there. Take it out. Don't want to do that. The other things that kind of didn't really mention here is that I've learned is start with small plants. Gardening's about patience. Where they say it's the slowest of the performing arts. So if you start with small plants, they will root in, get going, need so much less attention than large plants. People think, I want to get a big plant because if I get a small plant, I'm going to have to water it more. That is not true. A big plant needs much more water. And when you take a little, quart or pint pot with a little plant in there, it's got almost as much, it's got more root in here than it has top. You get a 3-gallon, 5-gallon, 15-gallon, 25-gallon tree, you've got that tree and you've still got this very limited amount of roots to support that tree. It's much more difficult, takes much longer to settle in and get growing. But you have to be patient. You don't have instant landscape when you start with small plants, but you have much less things you don't need. One, I'm saving you money telling you get smaller plants than bigger plants. But people always say, you talk about rip out plants, that's expensive. Plants are super cheap. They are literally the only thing that normal people buy that whose value goes up with time, other than your house. Anything else, your car, anything except for maybe gold jewelry and your house. It loses value. Yes, plants can die, but in general, they give more value to your home. They give more value to your house. They provide more pleasure. So plants are cheap from that perspective. And best of all, you can share plants. It's great. The number of people who have, braved my end of the cul-de-sac with my vicious guard dog, Gus, who walk away with plants in hand are, just tons of people, because they'll say, oh, that is so amazing. And I'll go out, hey, I've got a shovel out there with me. I'll pop out a piece of the plant and hand it to them. I regularly, I decide I don't like these bulbs anymore. I'll pull them out and I'll put them in a bucket out on the street with a little sign on them to say what they are. I also put out little labels with the names on them so people can take them home and label them in their garden, because I want them to do that, even if they'll never do that, because I'm obsessive. But we can share plants, and it's such an easy way to, kind of in a time where not everybody's talking to each other and things like that, you can, it's an easy way to start a conversation is, to admire somebody's plants in their garden, to talk to them about the plants in your garden. It's just a fun way to get to know people.
So there weren't too many questions today. I guess everybody was mesmerized by all the Latin, but we did have one question from Johnny. He wants to know, if the Glorioso lily stops flowering but has a long vine, do I need to trim it back to get blooms?
No. So the Gloriosa lily, if it has flowered and it's no longer flowering that season, you want to leave that vine up. It has a limited flowering period. And since it's a tuber underground, tuber or tuberous root, I can't remember right off, it needs those tops to photosynthesize for the rest of the season to build energy for that. Now, if you've had one and it's growing and it's not flowering each year, that could be that it'll make multiple tubers and they can get kind of congested. And if that's the case, what you want to do is go in there, dig them up, divide them up, replant them, and either replant a whole bunch or share some with friends or whatever. But if they've flowered for you this season, you want to just leave them.
Okay. Well, that is all the questions we'd had in the chat, and really all the time we have for today. Yeah. But so thank you so much, Mark, for pulling this together.
It was fun. It was.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. We will be back next week with the midweek program. We're going to be doing fast fillers with Greg and Tim. They're going to tell us plants that fill in spaces real quick for those of you who aren't quite so patient for the garden. So I hope you all will join us for that. We'll see y'all next Wednesday at 3. Y'all take care.